Connectivity plugins have been available since the earliest days of Reflow. And about 2 years ago, the Renderkit has also been integrated to Cinema. This means that you can now exploit the full spectrum of possibilities of both programs. This also leads us to one question. What are the differences between the Renderkit and the connectivity plugins? The Renderkit has been developed to improve and accelerate the render process. Everything is based on particles there, and there is no geometry support. The Renderkit also contains the Hybrido and particle mesh engines with exactly the same parameters and features as in Reflow. This means meshes are no longer imported from Reflow, but created at render time. And a mesh only exists as long as it takes to render the current frame. This, of course, helps to save time and storage resources. Particles can be multiplied with a multi-point option to create huge amounts of spray and foam. Particles can also be rendered as volumetrics with a built-in shader. Also, mist data from Hybrido simulations can be rendered. A dedicated displacement shader can be used to add displacement maps to Hybrido meshes. On the other side, we have the plugins, and plugins are used to import data from Reflow and export data to Reflow. Meshes, particles, geometry, and relief nodes are supported here. Meshes can't be created at render time, and all data must exist before it can be imported. There is also no support for mist data. Geometry, for example, can be reconstructed from the imported data, and cameras can also be exchanged between Reflow and Cinema 4D. And finally, there is support for animation and point-level animation data, textures, and finally UVs. So these are the main differences, and now we can start with a project where you will learn how to work with the Renderkit and the plugins in one scene. Because all elements of Reflow's connectivity pipeline can be used together without limits. I switch over to Cinema 4D. And here a washing machine is simulated. It's a very basic setup and consists of a laundry drum and 2 caps to enclose everything. One is invisible here. And the sheets of cloth have been imported from another application and contain point-level animation data, as you can see here. The laundry drum, on the other hand, has animation keys to describe the rotation. The caps are static objects. So all these scene elements are exported to Reflow's native SD format. And to do this, we open the Reflow SD exporter plugin. It can be found here. And the most important thing is to store the point-level animation data. First, we shift all the data here to the Exported Objects column with the Add All button. And then we're going to select all the close objects and choose Vertex. It doesn't change here. There only applies a check, and that's already enough. These nodes here are really stored in vertex mode now. So with this simple step, the plugin stores the point level data for the close objects, and the animated objects will be exported using their keys with the matrix option. Now we can also define an animation range. Here it's 225 frames. And finally, there's scale. Scale can be left untouched. A scale of 1 means that the plugin converts everything to match Reflow standard scale. This conversion is necessary because Cinema's default scale is 100 times bigger than Reflow's. Of course, scale is maintained when everything is imported back to Cinema. And the SD importer, we're going to have that later, has a scale option as well. Now, finally, we can save the SD to any directory. And here we export everything. It takes a few seconds until the data is written. And once this has happened, we can switch over to Reflow. In Reflow, the file is simply imported with the import object command. You can find it here. And then we choose the SD file we've just exported, click on Open, and here it appears. To rotate it a little. And I make this one invisible so you can have a look inside the laundry drum. And as you can see, the entire animation has been preserved and is now imported to Reflow. You can also scrub the timeline, and you have the entire animation range. To save us some time, I've prepared the complete scene we're going to render later. I just want to open that. And here the idea is to use 3 emitters, these 3 here. The first one, SPH water, fills the laundry drum with water. And with the help of a filter daemon, we create foam. And when a certain velocity is reached, here it's 5 meters per second, then the particles will be transferred to a dedicated emitter called SPH foam. Later, these foam particles will be turned into water again when the speed is falling below another velocity threshold from a second filter daemon. It's here, and the condition is lower than 3 meters per second. And these particles will be handed over to the SPH water recycled emitter. So it's a circular flow between water and foam with a constant change of states. And of course, I've previewed everything for you. Going to load the particle sequence. And this is how it looks like in the particle simulation. So far, we only have particles, and now the water emitters must be meshed. I have attached the water emitters, SPH water and recycled, with a right click and insert emitters. I've chosen these 2 here, to the particle mesh node. And when you take another look at the particles, you will see that they're colored. You can see that here are these shades of blue and white. And here the colors are representing the fluid's velocity. Such an attribute is also called a channel. And a channel stores a certain property, for example, velocity or age. The values can be translated into vertex maps and used for shading purposes. Before you create the mesh, you simply have to check which channels you want to use for rendering the image. And we have to switch over to the particle mesh node. And here you can find a panel called particle channels. And here I'm going to export velocity, age, pressure, and curvature. And before you create the mesh, you simply have to check which channels you want to use for the rendering, just as I did it here. And by default, all the meshes are stored in bin files. But the best format for the exchanging meshes between Reflow and Cinema is the MD format, because only this format supports the entire range of channels we've just defined. So we open Export Central from the Export menu, and here you can find the particle mesh node. We open this branch, and you can find the mesh sequence MD tag here, and it's already checked. And there you can find all these channels you can see over there. And I've already prepared the ones we want to export. Again, velocity, age, pressure, and curvature. One thing is very important. The texture tag must be checked in any case. It is required to extract the vertex maps from the mesh in Cinema 4D later. And the bin format shouldn't be deactivated because it's Reflow's cache format. without these bin files, it's not possible to create a preview inside Reflow, for example. Then you click on Done. And now you can make your remaining settings like weight normalization, polygon size, and smoothness, or filters can be applied. And finally, you create the mesh, and this is be done with this button. You can build the entire range of meshes. And of course, I've prepared another preview for you, how the mesh looks like. So what we want to do now is to transfer the fluid data to Cinema 4D, of course. That's the main purpose of this workshop. So I'm going to switch back to Cinema 4D. In this case, it's actually not necessary to import the object's data because their motions have been defined in Cinema 4D already. This is what we've exported to Reflow already. But if you want to import the objects, just use the SD importer. I've also prepared a small scene with a few materials here. And the SD importer can also be found on the plugins, and it's located here, Reflow SD importer. By default, all data is stored in a single file called Animation SD. And the interesting thing with this plugin is that it recreates the objects from the SD file, and you can start with a blank scene as I did it here. Everything will be created on the fly. So now I'm going to open this animation SD file. It can be found in the project's objects folder from the Reflow project. And here it is. And then we import it. And now I have a complete one-to-one representation. I'm going to make this invisible again. And the entire animation has been preserved and maintained. So this is the first step. To load the meshes, we add a Reflow Mesh importer. This one. And under Setup, we choose the MD sequence we've exported before and created before. Can be found here. Particle meshes, MD, and load it. In the setup panel, you find everything you need to adjust the mesh's appearance in Cinema, including the already mentioned scale parameter. It's located here. You also have a parameter for blur, for motion blur. The MD tab is of much higher interest for this scene because there we can create the vertex maps to visualize the difference in speed, age, or pressure. And as you can see, only the channels which have been checked in Reflow's Export Central are now accessible. We again have velocity, age, pressure. And here you can see the associated tags, the vertex map tags. And here it's also velocity, age, pressure, and curvature. The magnitude option here is only available for vector-based channels like velocity. And without this option, the plugin creates 3 vertex maps for the vectors x, y, and z components. So when I uncheck magnitude, you'll notice another 3 tags here. And now they're velocity x, y, and z. When I check it again, everything will be combined in a single vertex map tag again. So by default, these vertex maps are not visible and everything's displayed in Cinema Standard Gray. And to change this, we need 2 materials. These materials represent the maximum and minimum values of the channel. The values between these extrema are visualized with interpolated colors. So here the blue color represents the lowest value and white the highest value. The order is important. First, we apply the blue material, and then the white one. So now we're going to open the white material and add an alpha channel and apply a vertex map effect. Just click on the white icon, And I can see an empty slot. And you simply choose one of these tags here. I'm going to use velocity here and drag it over to there. That's already everything you have to do. And now we can start a render. Sorry, going to delete this so it's better visible. So the effect is now visible but not very distinctive. And if you want to control the colors, then you can change the vertex map's opacity. And this is done with a scale parameter, and you find one for every channel. And settings smaller than 1 create more and more blue areas, while higher values enhance the white parts. A value of 0.2 gives us pretty good results here, and we can render again. And I can see a much better distribution of the colors, and everything's shaded smoothly. So this basic workflow is valid for all the other channels as well. And in the Renderkit meshing tools, you will find almost the same options and parameters. This means once you're familiar with the workflow for the connectivity plugins, you won't have any problems to repeat this workflow in the Renderkit. Okay, so now we have configured the mesh, but we also want to render foam particles. And for this purpose, we add a Renderkit particle element. It's also located on the plugins, Reflow Renderkit, and here you can see the Reflow Renderkit particle. To add it, here it's also possible to use the connectivity plugins particle loader, because this tool has one too. Here, but here we want to focus on a certain feature that is only available for the Renderkit. And this feature is called multipoint. The current amount of foam particles is by far not enough to create convincing foam, and this can be changed with a multipoint feature. But first we need a particle sequence. So we go into particle files. As you can see, you can load up to 10 particle sequences here and combine them under one hood, under one Renderkit node. So we're going to open the SBH foam sequence and adjust the particle's radius. Here we're going to try it with 0.01. You can also adjust the particle size based on certain channels like velocity or age. You can see all these channels here. With particles, the channel information is read from the particle files directly, and there's no need to work with vertex maps. You simply select one attribute and go to scale by channel. And now the size of the particles will be randomized and bound to this channel. So the size depends on the current speed value of the particles, and this is a very interesting thing. But now for the multipoint option. The multipoint option tells Cinema how many additional particles should be created per existing particle. So if there are 10,000 particles and you enter a density value of 5, you will get 50,000 particles for the render. New particles are added around an existing particle within a certain radius, and this radius is called dispersion. You can find it here. If it's too high, you will see unnatural fluffy clouds, so it's better to keep this value similar to the particle's radius we have defined here. And a good value would be, in this case, 0.02, for example. It takes some time to add the new particles, because in Cinema's Renderkit, this is not a procedural process, but instances are created. Unfortunately, this is not a resource-friendly process, but currently there's no other technical way to do this. And of course, we have to render several test scenes to find the working settings and the desired motion burst strength. But once you are happy, you can trigger the final render, and I've created a rendered preview for you. So this is how it could look in the end. And in this render, I've used the H channel to control transparency and colors, and not the velocity channel as in the example before. So as you can see, it doesn't take very much to create a complete scene, and here we've used already existing meshes. But mesh creation can also be done in Cinema, and this can be considered the main purpose of the Renderkit. And I've prepared another scene to show you this effect. I've also prepared a preview to speed up things a little. So in this example, a setup with 2 emitters is used to fill a glass. It's made invisible here, and you have a better view of the colors and the particles. So when you create a mesh in Reflow, you add a mesh node first. It's located here. And then the emitters are attached. I right-click on the particle mesh node and choose Insert All Emitters. Now they are attached to the particle mesh node. In the next step, the parameters are adjusted. So there's the mesh polygon size again, and smoothness, and all these parameters are defined in the mesh node's own mesh panel. The particles radius, on the other hand, is controlled individually with the attached emitters. And when you click on that and then on field, you will see a radius value here for each attached emitter individually. So once you've made your settings, again, you build the mesh with this button here. And the workflow for the Renderkit is actually exactly the same. So once you know how to create a mesh in Reflow, you will immediately know how to create a mesh in Cinema 4D with the Renderkit. Let me switch over. Just 1 second, please. So I've already attached the Reflow Renderkit mesh. It can be found here in the Renderkit menu. And the Renderkit mesh node's mesh panel represents the mesh node in Reflow. And that's where the mesh-related parameters are located here as well. Again, you can find polygon size, smooth, and weight normalization. All these elements you have seen here before. And similar to the Renderkit particle plugin, the mesh tool provides 10 slots where you can load particle sequences. And these sequences represent the emitters. Again, these 2 here. And for each emitter or sequence, the radius can be controlled again to create the mesh. And here I've loaded the other one, the other sequence, and again we have a radius value here. I've already adjusted it. And there are also panels for filtering, clipping, and optimizations. All these elements are also part of the mesh node in Reflow. You can see exactly the same panels there. As said, here we need 2 sequences because we have 2 emitters. And once the files are loaded, only the particles are visible. I'm going to make the glass invisible. Now we have a slightly better view. I hope it's not too bright at home on your screens, and you can see it. So in order to evaluate the mesh, we can go to the display panel here. And then we click on Show Mesh. And here you will only see a small spot, nothing more. And this is because level of detail is set to 10 in this case, and only 10% of the available particles are loaded at the moment. So if we increase this to 100 and update the mesh, then we have the complete representation. And here you go. Another idea is to simply render the current frame. So that's another option. It takes a little time until the mesh is prepared, and then the render starts. And as you've seen in the Reflow preview, the emitters have different colors, and it would be nice to maintain them. With a so-called melt material, it's possible to blend differently colored emitters, and the usage is really simple. You first go to the channels panel here. I just put that to 10%, otherwise everything will be pretty slow. You go to the channels panel and you activate the weights channel here. And when this is active, you will see two weight map tags at the Renderkit mesh node. For better result, you should also check the precise option, this one here. And the melt material itself can be found in the material manager. Go to Create, Shader, and Reflow MeltMaterial. So now you create the remaining materials and apply them to the mesh node. Here I have some milky shaders created, and I apply them. And the last node, and this is important, the last material is always the melt material. So that's already everything you have to do, and when you render the scene, you can see how the different colors are blended. Again, it takes a little time. And now you can see already how the colors are blended and how they mix. And this is really a very nice feature. And this also works with more than 2 emitters, of course. You can use 3 or 4 sequences and mesh them and blend all the colors together. It's also possible to influence the weight map's opacity. And for this purpose, you can change the melt material's melt index. This is a normalized value, and it ranges from -1 to +1. And with this parameter, you can, as said, change the opacity of the weight maps. And of course, I've rendered everything for you in advance, so you can take a look at everything, how it looks. And you can also see motion blur has been applied. And towards the end, the colors mix more and more. Okay. In the following chapters of this webinar, we want to deal with specific features for particles. A very nice combination lies in the connection between Reflow's particles and PyroCluster. With Cinema's volumetric shade, it's possible to render mist or dust and smoke, for example. And I've also prepared a scene. I'm going to change this first, to close this first, and open my PyroCluster scene. Okay, here you are. The scene contains a collapsing object, and the particles here have been created at the fragment's vertices with a simple Python script in Reflow. The objects have been loaded with the already known SD importer. It was this one here. And the particles with a Reflow particle importer. And to establish a link between particles and PyroCluster, we only need a few clicks. First, we have to start with a particle sequence, of course. Here it's already prepared, as you can see. It's done under setup, and here you can choose the file path to your particle sequence. And then we're going to add a thinking particle geometry container. It's located under Simulate, Thinking Particles, and this one. And we drag it to the RF container node. So then we have again to go to Simulate and open the Thinking Particle settings. And here you can find a particle group. It's exactly the one we have loaded with this container here. And this group is dragged to the particle geometry object's particle group slot. And this is a basic setup, and we are almost ready. Now we have to open the particle plugins setup menu and check keep order of particles. Now this is again very important, but this step is only necessary for animations, because with PyroCluster every particle requires a fixed ID, and this is exactly what this option does. And finally, the particle's radius is set to 0 in the render panel, because we don't want to render particles here, only the PyroCluster clouds. And now the image is already finished and ready to render, and again I've created a result for you, a little clip where you can see how this is finally looking. And now you can see the dust clouds around the objects. There's also motion blur again. And this is really a pretty nice feature because it's so easy to use. You just have to follow a few steps. It's a matter of a few clicks, nothing more. And then you have a perfect connection to PyroCluster. And maybe you've also recognized the Add Shader button here in the plugin's render panel. This button opens the door to a very nice feature. It allows the shading of individual particles based on their channel data. I've also prepared a scene, a little bit different. So in this scene, the particles have been attracted through various demons, and they're following a certain path. And I'm going to drag it forward. And the fluid has been imported with the Particle Loader plugin. Again, here, this one, Reflow Particle Importer. And now let me show you how this feature works. Again, only a few steps are required. So first, you click on the Add Shader button, and you will see an object, a material is applied and already attached to the importer plugin here. So in this case, the particles should be rendered as spheres with a radius of 1.5. And to make the channel data visible, we can go to the display panel. And there you can already see a gradient. And you can choose which property you want to render. And again, you have the choice of so many different channels. Again, velocity, force, neighbors, age, and so on. And here it's again velocity. The best thing is that the plugin doesn't need any other material, and everything's managed with this color gradient. So when we choose another color, you can see the immediate result. If the color range, like here, lacks contrast, then you can deactivate automatic range. And now you enter your own values. And the values below your current min and max can be used as a reference. And smaller settings will give us better results. So 7, for example. And now I have a much better distribution of colors again. And again, this is already everything you have to do to exploit this very nice feature. And again, a preview. So here's particle shading. And now you can see the distribution of colors based on the velocity of the particles and how it changes over time. I'm going to replay it so you can see it again. And this is really a very, very nice feature, and I think the only platform currently which supports this feature is Maya. You won't find it in Houdini, you won't find it in 3D Max or anywhere else. This is really something pretty unique. And instead of spheres, it's also possible to use any custom object like cones, cubes, or whatever you want. And to do that, you go to Render again and switch Render Type to Object. And now you can drag any object to the render instance slot, and it will be used for the render process. Well, and the final part, we'll take a look at RealWave surfaces and how to import them. I'm going to close this again and switch over to Reflow and load my prepared scene. Takes a moment, and here we are. I think I've created a preview for that as well, how it looks, so you can have a first impression of what we're going to do. Yeah. So this is a result. We have some stones and these boxes which are moved by the waves of the RealWave surface, and they create splashes. And this scene we're going to export to Cinema 4D and render it finally. So a RealWave surface is actually nothing more than a displaced mesh. And to deform it, you can choose from several so-called deformers. And with a right click and add wave, you can find a long list of different deformers. And these modifiers can be combined to get complex wave structures. Another very interesting feature is that the waves are able to react on objects. Objects, on the other hand, are also moved by the waves. They can float, they can submerge, and they can create splashes with a dedicated emitter. And this is the RealWave object splash emitter, and it can be found here next to the RealWave surface. And the result we get from such a simulation is a complex interplay between waves, bodies, and fluids. The rocks and boxes in this scene have been exported with the SD exporter plugin and then loaded to Reflow. And again, to get some more splashes, I've added these two splash emitters, and the first one controls the splashes for the boxes, and the second one for the rocks. So we have again two particle sequences. And the object's motion is again stored in an animation SD file, and the RealWave surface geometry is also stored in a dedicated file. Here again is the animation SD for the boxes and rocks. And here we have a RealWave SD file, and there all the wave information is stored. And to get all this data to Cinema 4D, we'll be using exactly the same methods as described before. So again, the objects are loaded with a SD importer. We let the plugin create the objects. The animation SD file, open it. And here you can see one node which can be deleted. It's just a surrounding cube to enclose everything. It has been made invisible in Reflow already, but here it showed up. So the next part is to load the particles with a Renderkit particle node again. And we choose the sequences. Under particles, it's the first emitter here. And here, the second one. I'm going to extend this a little. So now we're looking for the object splash 2 emitter and open this sequence. And I can already see the foam around the bodies. The only remaining question is how to import the wave surface, because there's no particular plugin. But since the waves have been stored as an SD file, it's possible to reuse the SD importer plugin. So we're going to use it again, SD importer, and spot our RealWave file. It's here, import it, and now we have the complete scene transferred to Cinema 4D. The wave surface can be treated like any other object. It can be shaded and rendered, of course, and this is what I've done in advance to give you a better view. So this is how it could look. With some nice motion blur, we have spray particles, and everything surrounds the objects. The objects are moving, and the waves are displacing the objects and the particles. So, as you have seen in this workshop, the concepts are always the same, and it's possible to combine all elements freely and without limits. You can also add more than one Renderkit or connectivity plugin to separate the imported data. It's totally up to you. And these are only some of the Renderkits and plugins features, and we have far more possibilities. But anyway, I hope that this introduction has helped to get a better understanding of how to improve the appearance of your fluid and rigid body simulations in Cinema 4D. I'm also sure that the techniques presented here will get you off to a good start, and once you understood the basics of the connection between Reflow and Cinema, you will definitely love it, because it opens a whole new world to cinema and your daily work. So thank you very much for your attention and being part of this workshop. Now we have some time for your questions. And I switch over to Brian and Katie.
Hey there. Well, I'm glad everybody was able to, oh, here we go. I'm going to show my screen and I guess go to here. So we do have some questions. I don't know if you probably want to go back to your screen if it might be easier to answer. One question came in from Willie that is asking about, a couple people are asking about slow motion and 60 or 120 frames per second type of stuff. One comes in that says 120 frame per sample example would be breaking the glass milk, having the glass shatter while the RealFlow liquid particle mesh explodes. Then do some kind of bullet time type of thing, it looks like, and time adjustments with the camera. There's another question about, along the same thing, actually it's the same person, just what the proper workflow is for slow motion, such as 60 or 120 frames per second, using Cinema 4D, RealFlow, and After Effects.
Okay, so this is really a complex workflow, and this can't be explained here on the fly. This would fill.
Well, how about a high? Do you have a general? I have to even think about it myself. How we do that? Just a general high level direction of what would be the first steps, maybe.
To do some kind of bullet time, it's the best thing to...
Well, mostly let's forget the bullet time. I think it's mostly about the slow motion, like if you wanted to do slow motion water effect.
Yeah, well, in Reflow, I just switch over. Maybe you can do that, Brian, so I can show the screen.
I will attempt to use my horrible GoToMeeting task here. Let's see. Oops. There you go.
I didn't get a message so far.
Yeah, here you go.
Oh, that I can.
I muted you. I hit mute instead.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
It's not in 3D. I don't know how to use it.
Okay. Now I'm back again. So to do these effects of slow motion, it's all about frames per second, of course. And to do this, you go to the Simulate button, and there's a little triangle beside of that. And under Options, you can find the simulation options. And here you can change the frames per second output. And this is done on a per scene basis, because there's also a global value for that. And this one is located under Preferences. Here, and sorry, here it is. And this one is valid for any scene. And if you want to change it for a particular scene, you go to Options, and here you can enter actually any value you want, like 500, for example. And to avoid certain artifacts, the best thing is to play with the substeps here. When you have a very high FPS output rate, you normally do not need very much substeps. At this rate, a value of 10 or 15 is absolutely enough to get a stable animation. But if your simulation turns unstable, the best thing is to raise and increase minimum substeps first and equal it maybe with a max substep. So if you want to use 15 steps and you have instabilities, just enter 15s, and then you have a fixed amount of substeps, and this will increase your stability drastically. So I hope this question has been answered.
There's another question from somebody who I think must have some experience with this, because he's asking about the RealFlow Mist. Can it be connected to PyroCluster? Because the Mac RealFlow Renderkit supposedly has an issue rendering Mist in V4D.
That's true. At the moment, there's a severe bug. This is going to be fixed with the next version. We're already working on this. Currently, there's unfortunately no way to connect PyroCluster with Mist, because Mist is stored in a completely different format, and this one doesn't simply work with PyroCluster. But it will be possible with the next version, which will be out in 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully.
Okay. Right. Did you? There's another kind of rendering question, I guess. I think I answered this correctly, but this is from Mark. He was asking if there was any limitations if you were using RealFlow and V-Ray for Cinema 4D versus the Cinema 4D native renderer.
Yeah, currently the Renderkit cannot be used with V-Ray. Right. Personally, I don't use V-Ray at all, so I'm a bit of a noob here, and I don't know it exactly, but I know that the Renderkit cannot be used with V-Ray at the moment. We're also working on the connectivity between these two elements, and hopefully we will get it running soon.
But if you weren't using the Renderkit doesn't work with Cinema 4D at all, correct?
Normal meshes you import from Reflow, and particles should actually work, as far as I know.
So if they had Cinema 4D for V-Ray, wouldn't that render as well, even just without the Renderkit?
This should actually work, yes. But
so
to be honest, I have to recheck this, and I have to ask our specialists for that, who are doing the connectivity between all these render engines in Cinema.
Okay. There's a question come in from Stefan, if there's any plan for Octane support.
Currently not. We're always testing which platforms could be used. Arnold is on our list at the moment, of course. This is high priority. Octane at the moment not, but this doesn't mean that it will never be supported.
Okay. I think that is all of the questions for the time being. I'm scrolling through to make sure I actually answered everybody.
Okay.
I think that is it. There was Mark Leedy won the $25 Amazon card, and so I will send an email directly to him and see how he wants that delivered, just electronically or otherwise. Just want to see if you guys are paying attention, and apparently a lot of you were. And if there's any other questions, there is. That's right. There was one more. Sorry. He's asking me over and over again because he thought.
Yeah, please go ahead.
From Claudio.
Okay. Hi, Claudio.
He wanted to discuss a little bit about Krakatoa integration, with RealFlow if there was time.
Oh.
It's a little bit outside, a little bit. He just, yeah. If there's any case study, or if you guys have been working with Krakatoa at all, or anything else.
No, not at all at the moment. Well, no, sorry, I can't say anything. And before I start to give any wrong information, I better keep that for me locked. No, well, sorry, Claudio.
Thomas up over at ThinkBox about that one, then maybe.
Yeah. Sorry, Claudio.
Okay. And that, I think, is the last question. So I think I sent out a chat. There is a RealFlow promotion that is going to be happening for the attendees of this seminar. I'll send out the details of it, but essentially there's an additional discount on new seats and upgrades, whether they are standalone or node lock. And I sent out a chat. It'll range depending on which one it is, but it's about 15% additional off of each product. So for often full RealFlow floating, that's $600. For a node lock, it's $375, I believe, and so forth. And I'll put that in an email and send it to everybody, and you'll get a promo code that you can just use, and it'll discount it accordingly. If there's no more questions, I will definitely be recording this. It is being recorded, and we'll send a link to it to everybody on the recording as well. Give me a day. As you can probably tell, I don't use this particular presentation software that much. Our normal person was on vacation, so I kind of took over. So I will get that up as soon as possible in the next day or two and make it available for everybody. I guess that's it. Thomas, thank you so much. Katie, thank you very much. And everybody else, thank you for everybody for joining. And we'll talk again soon.
Okay, thank you also very much. Thanks for hosting this webinar, and goodbye.
All right. Take care, everybody.